is for all those people that never quite get there. Yeah, it's gonna be alright.
These tenets, and even though I know it's been around for 20 years, I really wanted to get a ground level conversation about the 15 characteristics of white supremacy. And if we're good on your end, my friend, we can get started.
All right, well, peace. Proper education always corrects errors. Um, we are a few days before WrestleMania 41, so true to my personality, I am a huge wrestling fan. And I'm going to want to give a shout out to WrestleMania that's coming up. I like wrestling because wrestling is the most inclusive American art that has ever been crafted. It's even more inclusive than music, which is hard. That's a hard thing to say, but
Yeah.
as much as music and dime novels, print, have allowed people to, from the marginalizations of whatever part of the power dynamics that occur, to access wealth, it's been wrestling, music, and then cheap fiction of whatever kind that can be consumed by the masses.
Yeah.
So, in 1999, Tima Akun and Kenneth Jackson Jones published an article called The 15 Characteristics of White Supremacist Culture. And they were doing so when we look at academia, in an environment that was unique to a conversation about race inside the United States of America, right? So for people who are going to try and keep track, right, historically, you got to have a generation outside of enslavement before you can have any recognized academic achievement, especially if you happen to live in a white body and you have, to this point, have never thought of the power differential that happens between you when you interact with a black, brown, or indigenous person as if the racial caste system is true. You're walking around at the interpersonal level as if equality is happening when that's not what's going on. So the very first skill that I ask people to adopt is the skill of being able to listen. And I usually direct them over to White Woman Whisperer in order to learn this skill.
Right.
And she does a good job of doing it in real time. Because listening to those that can punch up to you at any given time, but if you punch down, but you really think you're punching straight, equality to equality, but you're always punching down if you're a part of the oppressor class. It doesn't feel good when they can crack a joke back to you, but you can't defend yourself like this is a peer. You begin to be very discombobulated. So when it comes down to number two, the second skill, how do you process those emotions without causing harm to black, brown, and indigenous persons? That's what you're going to portion her on. They suggest that you get a notebook and you use the written word, which is another characteristic of white supremacy culture, in order to treat it like a pensive, like your name is Dumbledore from Harry Potter, and get it out, and then come back 3 weeks later, and if it still sounds sane, then you may want to look at it and say, maybe there's something here. Otherwise, it was good that you got that out in a way that did not harm nobody.
Right.
After that, you end up having to go to Tammy Trillo and learn what empathy truly is. Not the pop culture coming from Dr. Phil out there in the TV newsland definition of empathy. Not what gets debated on social media, but what is the human characteristic that we're talking about, okay? Then there are a number of and there are classroom educators that come on and off the app. Kesh was the last one that I was following, and they give out strategies of how to interrupt whiteness, how to interrupt communicating the social programming that is the dominant culture of the United States of America.
Right.
Okay. Now, once you've gotten those skill sets, I advise, then we can have a conversation at the level that I would like to have a conversation, which is epigenetic healing. Okay. So, I try and use what is in pop culture to communicate very complex ideas. So I'm going to try and do this when it comes down to John J. Rambo. And the difference between, the goal would be the difference between the oppressed and the oppressor. When I was young, when John J. Rambo first came out, we were taught that he, as a Vietnam veteran, had PTSD. The movie begins with him hunting down former soldiers that he was at war with, comrades, veterans. And he finds a black soldier friend, and the wife explains that he brought cancer over with the war, and he whittled down to so small that she could carry him off herself. Oh, and so from that heartbreak, which everybody in the film, watching the film, can attempt to commiserate with, he goes into a small town, and the small town sheriff doesn't want him there and uses force against John J. Rambo, and then begins treating him with the exact same torture techniques that he experienced in Vietnam, and he received flashbacks. Those flashbacks led to him having a trauma response, and in this manner, they taught us PTSD. Then, thanks to the pandemic and the election of Mr. Trump, Dr. Thelma Bryant, only the third black person to be a part of president of the American Psychological Association, wrestles a miracle for us and explains how the DSM-3, 4, and 5 do not apply to black people. As president of the American Psychological Association in 2021, she got that organization to apologize for upholding white supremacy culture all the days of its existence, which means when it does its diagnosis of mental health for black, brown, and indigenous persons, it is trying to do so as if Thomas Jefferson was saying. And that's not true. Okay? So, when we get to that level of examining everything as a potential lie, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, there needs to be a specific kind of space. And if you don't have the skill set to deal with that level of deconstruction, that no, Rambo doesn't have PTSD. He is the invader. He isn't Luke Skywalker. He isn't innocent. He is the stormtrooper. He imposed PTSD on the Viet Cong. He doesn't have it. He imposed it. What he has is something called PITS, PITS, perpetrator-induced trauma syndrome. So if you're oppressed, you have the PTSD, you've been beat upon. If you're the oppressor, you have the trauma from having to beat on. As they said in Israel, we will never forgive you for making us kill your children. That's PITS, perpetrator-induced trauma syndrome. Now, the medicine to deal with PITS is going to be different than the medicine that you have to deal with PTSD, even though you're dealing with the same book. Okay, so if I'm at Johns Hopkins, for example, I can use the same core book, and out of that core book, bring you a heart specialist. Out of that same core book, bring you a bone specialist, bring you a cancer specialist, bring you a blood disease, whatever specialist that we're looking for in the hospital. And that book, that central, simple book, is called Human Anatomy. Does this make sense? Right. So likewise, when it comes down to the human experience, that's universal. That's a universal book. You got a nervous system. Your nervous system is going to interact with with reality in a certain predictable manner. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. After that, what you do with your time, talent, and energy, that's within your realm of control. That's what triggers you to become the heart specialist or the lung specialist or the blood specialist. From the universal book, you get to do the different personalities. When you're part of the oppressor class and you control, because of the caste system, everyone underneath you has to treat you like you're white, like you're part of the oppressor class at all times, to the point where you start to believe it's normal when it's not normal. It's abnormal. And when it happens for 10, 12, 13 generations, like Resma Minicamp taught us, your normal becomes what you confuse to be your personality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's historical trauma. Now, interrupting historical trauma, like I said earlier, takes different kind of medicine than it does if you're dealing with an individual dealing with PTSD, which is immediate trauma. Okay? We have a question that was in science of, can an idea be communicated through DNA? Meaning, if you have an experience in one generation, can that lived experience get encoded into the DNA and get expressed by progeny, by the children?
Right.
Can the idea go through physical DNA? In 2013, they have something called the cherry blossom experiment. The cherry blossom experiment takes psychology and what we think of as healing and turns it on its head. Okay? They take white mice, white rats, and they construct a special cage where they can electrify the bottom of the cage. Then they take a hood and they can pipe in the smell of cherry blossoms. What they did is they took male mice, because sperm can be replicated relatively quickly. So if you can interrupt it, it wouldn't be with the ovum, it would be with sperm. So they have male mice. And what they did is every time they hit a switch, the smell of cherry blossoms would come in and the bottom floor would electrify. So spark certain rats, or you would get completely electrocuted and die, right? So after the first time of this experience, every time cherry blossom comes and you know electrical shock is coming, the rats and the mice go all crazy. They told the college students over the weekend, every time they got a wild hair up their tail, they just flip the switch, so that the mice were fully traumatized and there wasn't a set time that they could anticipate when the shock would happen. It was just in any given time.
Right.
After 3 to 4 days, they took the daddy mice, put them in with mama mice, let them cohabitate, then took the daddy mice immediately away so that there would be no communication to the next generation of any history of memory of what happened to the daddy mice. Then they took the children, put them in a regular cage, no regular bottom, it wasn't electrified, put a hood on there, piped in cherry blossom, and what, voila, happened to the children? What did they do? They responded. Right. They responded exactly like the daddy. And this happened up to 7 generations.
Wow.
Okay. So when we are seeing at the national level, Mr. Trump, which I think at the latest Washington Post reporting, they've got internals where people are walking around and this cat they are treating as if he really is King Midas, and he doesn't care how much pain is inflicted by his public policies. And from what we saw with the 50-51 protests that were organized and had substantial turnout, is that there is an angst that is happening that people cannot, in the masses, 252 million European Americans, actually be able to name. And that's because it's so buried within them that they're having a hard time identifying with what social programming allows for language them to articulate, because they're not supposed to be feeling it. This is not supposed to be happening to them.
No.
So now that it's happening personally, one-on-one, back to the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture. I love our culture, how that's what happens. Like, people think we're going all the way out here and then we never
Bring
really
right back. Right. I'm with you, brother. I'm just putting the oil, let it just cook.
I hear you. Right? So after the civil rights movement, which was the interruption back to the skill set, the interruption of whiteness, and historically within the United States of America, that was the civil rights movement. You get something called Jane Elliott, who is in Wisconsin. I believe she was in Wisconsin. And she, in the 3rd grade classroom, experiments with attempting to communicate the race idea to those who occupy the oppressor class. Okay? So what she comes up with is the blue-eyed, brown-eyed test. And you can Google this. It's on YouTube. It's pretty famous. She replicated it for corporate settings, for school settings, to teach adults and help them like deal with their racial stress. After her comes Invisible Knapsack. What's this woman's name? Why is this escaping me at the present moment? Okay, but that's the name of the book, which is intended to communicate the level of social programming that white people don't see race at any given time. Then Theodore Allen comes up with the concept of white privilege. And that being the currency, the social currency that you receive in that white people can see other white people as fellow human beings. From there, we get Robin DiAngelo doing white fragility, which is one of the triggers that cause racial stress within European Americans. Okay, it's really what she did on this. Well, she came up with her insight through her lived experience. Her book, White Fragility, is really a knockoff of White Rage from Carol Anderson. Okay, Peggy McIntosh. Thank you for the comments. Correct, Peggy McIntosh with Invisible Knapsack. Okay, so you need a little bit of that history and the fact that we really get to the fourth generation of white people, third generation on the other side of slavery, before you get a way to talk about what it feels like in the oppressor class, which is what the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture is. It's language for those who occupy the oppressor class to be able to talk about what this is. Look, we have this worship of the written word, meaning that just like we saw the trick used by the Trump administration with the judge gave an oral order when it came down to the plane being taken off with deportations. And they said it was an oral order. You didn't write it down. So if you had written it down, then it would have been a contract. And if it was a contract, then we would have had to follow through with it. Get it, worship of the written word. The oral word isn't sufficient, even though that's how most of us communicate and have communicated as human beings, and things that we would sit there and memorize on purpose. They take that away and it gets legalized and codified as this is the one true way in order to be human. That's 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture, right? Right, I'm the only one who can solve this, right? There's always got to be a savior complex, right? Which is coming in from Christianity. Okay?
Right.
So there's a book by Winthrop D. Jordan, White Man's Burden, and it was his account of the cultural material that the Englishmen brought over in the 1600s in order to establish colonial America. They are borrowing the culture of where they came from. So when they come to the New World, they're not using any of the lens that we do from the 21st century. They're not using a lens from the indigenous perspective. They're not using a lens from the kidnapped and prisoners of war that were called the transatlantic slave trade. They're working from the prism of England in 1600, in the 1500s. Okay? And they're looking at what they see before them through those lenses. They come over fighting each other. When they encounter indigenous people who choose not to be friendly towards them, they lose on a regular basis. The winning tactic of the Englishman was dis-ease. Black people were immune to the dis-ease that the white man had.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the pressure that creates this concept of race, which is from 1684, is you've got the Atlantic Ocean on one side that is causing you a lot of trouble. To get back to where you came from, that's about 44 to 66 days, depending on how the winds are blowing. That's a long time. That's a huge commitment. To your right, about 100 miles in, that's about as much grace as you have, which is not a lot of space. Even if you're on foot, you have hostile Native Confederacy from 1675 on. The engagement that making reference to as a milestone is King Philip's War. From King Philip's War on, the indigenous, specifically the Narragansett, are ready to get rid of indigenous people. It is between Black people being there, and when I say Black people, I mean Africans who can sit there and cover their eyes, and in covering their eyes, you cannot see them, but they can see you at night. between them being visible during the daytime and the nighttime as white people. You see, for the very first time after Bacon's Rebellion and after King Philip's War from 1675 to 1678, a distinction that comes out of Virginia first and then spreads like wildfire among 50,000 settlers. The concept of them being white, not British, not English, not Welsh, not Scot, white. It is an adaptation to the confines of colonialism. And the fear that that adaptation is protecting the people who are dealing with that fear from is why it keeps making manifest with us, and why we can sit there and break it down with the 15 characteristics. Okay? Because you have that loneliness generated from the fear of open conflict. Where's that open conflict coming from? Being a colonist. Keep going.
I think you just answered the first question I had for you, which was like, what is race? What is racism, and how do we get free from it? And you just took us down a journey of how race evolved in the midst of the conflict, which was kind of precursors to racism. That conflict came before the identity. The identity was made up to justify the conflict. Okay, you have I think it was like in 1700, the first pamphlet against racism was a preacher, and he's like, you know what? Read the story of Joseph. You know what I mean? Joseph was a slave. What his brothers did wasn't right. We're Christians. We shouldn't be doing this. How did they come back? Oh, well, that's because these people aren't equal to the brothers of Joseph. They don't have the intelligence of the brothers of Joseph, so they don't deserve the respect and the dignity of the brothers of Joseph. So we can do that because Joseph is one of us. Joseph is not, these savages. So they start to denigrate Black people, African American people, to justify their actions, to justify the exploitation. And then it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, because a lot of times we try to make race this eternal thing. Race is not that old.
Right.
This idea. So I wanted to hear your insight on that. Like, just bring it home as far as like, how did this idea of race develop out of that the colonial context?
Well, it comes down after that to basically economics. Once you're able to other the indentured servant, the concept of an indentured servant, which is different from an apprentice, because these are all English ideas. This is how the English person is viewing themselves. This has got nothing to do with Black people. It's got nothing to do with indigenous people. These are English ideas about how English people interact with the rest of the world. Okay? So there's this fear factor that they are managing that nobody else is managing. But because of how violent they are, everybody else has got to manage their violence. Okay? That's the colonial movement. So the law, if we look at it from that viewpoint, when we decenter whiteness, the law is for and always has been only one group, the colonists. The written word was for the colony to manage the colonialists. So when they say they're going to put martial law on you, bruh, martial law is already on you. Martial law has been on you every time you had to submit to the will of the crown. Period. What is maintaining the law? Violence.
Right.
Okay, not righteousness, not justice, not truth, not this is going to keep us alive. It's not life affirming. None of that is what is maintaining the law. What is maintaining the law is the death penalty, the force of law. That's coming over from England. That's Winthrop Jordan. Okay, so they're working from that premise. Okay, of if you don't do what I tell you to do, you're not going to make it. We'll excommunicate you, exile you into the wilderness. And if we exile you into the wilderness, how are you going to maintain yourself? This isn't Grizzly Adams. This isn't the Lone Ranger. You're not going to find no Tonto out there with the Nassagetter, the Whipnup, the Wampanoag, the Pequot. Not in 1680 or afterwards.
Right.
You got serious content. So by the time you get it, Thomas Jefferson, or George Washington, that generation in 1730. You have an entirely set up slaveocracy. They have a racial caste system because they just borrowed it over from the Catholic Church, just like everybody else in Europe. And they create the system, and they borrow it from the Spanish when it comes down to the actual names of four kinds of people, whether you're going to the black or whether you're going to the indigenous, right? You got the quote unquote mulatto, half-breed, 50-50.
Right.
Then you got the quadroon, that means another white person. The octoroon, another white person. Then they say you're white or you're black. Which way you're going? They play blood quantum. It's just they keep it, if you're going to center whiteness, if you're going from the legalistic, if you're coming from the colonialist, they're going to center themselves, which means that if you're black, then you're still enslaved up to 4. You got to be the 5th one. And now they say you're passing or presenting. If you're indigenous, then that means that that's the white person being borrowed into their tribe. You know, I as an Englishman, I in 1675, I can't own any of your property. I can't own any of your land. But I see one of yours who is absolutely gorgeous to me, and I have a baby with them. My son is tribe. My son is one of you, right? And so then I get him to have sex with another colonialist on the land that now he has access to because he's quote unquote half indigenous. But in the indigenous system, you're full indigenous at this time. You're not. There's no half idea. They're playing blood quantum. They start playing race under their legal system to discipline their behavior. Now, that's 1730. You get to Somerset decision in 1772. And everybody can Google me to make sure I'm right and exact when it comes down to my history. But I think I am. Somerset decision, where a American, a Yankee, brings himself and his bondservant with him to England. And once he's in England, the bondservant says, I am free because there is no enslavement happening in England. So I'm free as soon as I get onto this property. They have to have a decision, and that's the Somerset decision where it gets upheld. Yes, if a Yankee brings an enslaved person to England, that enslaved person can file for asylum and they be free. The United States of America, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington were like, oh, we don't like that. I'll see you later. And that's why you get something called the American Revolution. And from the American Revolution, the Constitution, which enshrines the idea of 3/5 of compromise, where everybody agrees with, we don't know how to run an economy without using black labor as credit. Our physical bodies were the currency of the quote unquote new American world. All right. So when we talk about racism, race is driving this entire engine, and it isn't economics. We got, my God, dude, Black Reconstruction by W.B. Du Bois, who makes it plain in his thesis. If racism was built on economics, it would have broken during Reconstruction. Race is built off of identity. Our European American friends and family do not know how to define themselves without having someone that they can control the life and death thereof. Toni Morrison in I'm sorry, I just recently reread it. Okay, Toni Morrison, Playing in the Dark, 1992, postulates that the difference between an Englishman and a Yankee is enslavement, meaning that because the indentured servant could grow out of their contract and after 7 years take the money that they get at the end of their contract in order to start a new life, buy a black person and become a new man. Literally, that's the language from that time period. And it is that capacity that creates the new material for what an American is, which is everybody is at that point a nobleman, because noblemen in Europe had power over gentlemen and yeomen. The power of life and death, their aristocracy. So with everyone now having the capacity to be king over 60 enslaved persons, they, as they said, felt born again. When your identity is driving this concept of race, we start seeing why they're having such a hard time conversating about it without feeling like we are attacking them. So when I do my classes, I want to have a deeper conversation than what those who initially come to the conversation want to have, because the basic concept of what it is that we're talking about isn't in the public sphere. We're going through a long, dark night of the soul here under the second Trump administration that is now forcing people to go on their healing journeys when the great majority of them, if given the choice, would choose to not deal with the shadow of what it feels like to be white.
Mm, that's powerful. And just to recap, because I know there's an argument that's not has never been won, but there's always been an argument about what the Civil War was over, right? Whether the Civil War was over states' rights or over slavery. But recapping what you just said, not only was the Civil War over slavery, but the American Revolution was also over slavery. And that's not something that's taught. That's not common knowledge. The people think it's over ideals and freedom. It's when it's actually the opposite. It's like, wait a minute, you're treating these people like human. We don't want to do that. Not only that, we want to expand beyond the Appalachians and get this whole land. We want to do manifest destiny. And y'all don't want us to do that because you have treaties with the Native Americans and we don't want to honor those. That's wild.
Not in any way, shape, or form. Not in any way, shape, or form. Right. So what we're asking our European American friends and family to do when it comes down to going on their healing journey, as I said earlier, right, is different than what we're asking ourselves to do. Okay? Now we switch gears a little bit. What are the pressures that are shaping Black and Blackness during this entire time? Okay? So having agency over self becomes crucial to the quote-unquote Black identity. Being able to name yourself. I mean, that's the whole thing behind Cassius Clay versus Muhammad Ali.
Right.
Okay? Whereas our European American friends and family are sitting up there like, why are you guys having this issue? Why is it so, why do you have the power? Why? Because we're attempting at all given times in order to have some kind of agency over our Black bodies. What do we value more than anything when it comes down to Black culture, Black psychology? It's personality. We really value what cannot be taken away. So there's always the sunken place, as we use in Hollywood, has been around for at least 600 years. When our autistic friends and family talk about masking, it comes close to that as far as in the oppressor class, but it's not what we're talking about when it comes down to what Black people had to do in the face of psychopaths like Thomas Jefferson. Like when we talk about Sally Hemings, we don't really talk about Sally Hemings because if we talk about the environment that Sally Hemings had 5 children in, you would sit there and not be able to have a conversation about Thomas Jefferson and talk about any ideals. The room was 13 feet by 14 feet, no windows, with a fireplace in the middle of it so that she could stay warm. But it was basically you had to step into a cellar with some furniture there, and she had to have everything brought down to her. So if somebody got sick or somebody forgot to bring a meal or resources, be that a candle, pillow, medicine, whatever it was, she just suffered 5 babies.
That's wild.
In that kind of environment. Okay? So when we have a conversation about mental health and the fact that Sally Hemings didn't go insane in that environment, we have to now start borrowing Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. We have to start borrowing Dr. Joy DeGruy. We have to start borrowing Dr. Resma Minican. We have to start borrowing Dr. Rita Walker when it comes down to how do we account for the fact that black people survived what other people would say is supposed to break minds and cause moon night expressions of people where they have multiple personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the very fact that those who had adverse reactions to the pressure of enslavement, when they jumped when massa was around, those ones got murdered quick. So there was a literal, just we talked about with the DNA, with the cherry blossom, literal transformation of DNA to the point where we are a different kind of people. There was no kind of people like us before the transatlantic slave trade. We are crafted because of the transatlantic slave trade, and our mentality and everything about us is absolutely unique. No one else has gone through that kind of pressure. So we can't use, like I keep saying this, the same medicine that the oppressor class would use in order to go on our healing journeys to walk out of, what did we say? Like mental slavery.
Right.
Okay. And whenever we try and communicate that on a mass platform, there's so much misunderstanding that the oppressor can't hear the word woke, can't hear normal words that we use in the oppressor class, in the oppressed class. When it gets translated, they can't hear it the same way. They want us to break it down and have a conversation with them as if we're not being oppressed.
Right.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's reverse racism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when it comes down to the medicine that we do when we go on our healing journey, it literally is having the strength that when we step outside of our front door and we know that we may not come back because of just being black, that we do so with a certain carriage that lets everybody know you are dealing with the free black man, free black woman, free black child who knows that when I step in front of you, my presence is what is causing the reaction inside of you. It's got nothing to do with me. The way this is set up, if you're in a white body, you are defining yourself as what is not going to happen to your body. You are not black. Mm-hmm. So the way black people are treated in our society, you're not going to get treated that way. So if I'm walking around with a confidence that what I say and do is always going to cause a reaction out of you, now I'm the one who has the drive and the initiative. That's Toni Morris. That when she woke up to the idea that white people were defining themselves as not black people, now she has all the power. I don't have to talk about you. I don't have to. How do I think without white people being a part of the equation?
Right.
Being irrelevant. Freedom for those who are oppressed is an absence of the oppression. Freedom for the oppressor is an absence of resistance. So us showing up authentically as ourselves without dimming our light in any way, shape, or form, cognitive of the power dynamics that we are navigating at any given time, and able to articulate our mastery of interactions, human interactions. Now the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture are completely inverted and made irrelevant because what the reaction is, the potential violence is no longer affecting who and what we are. Okay? That's what Marcus Garvey is trying to point toward. That's what Martin Delaney was trying to point toward. That's what Henry Highland Garnett was attempting to point towards. Under enslavement, it clicked to them under enslavement what psychologically was really going on. So then once we work from the level of epigenetics, when we talk about healing, it now becomes not trying to replace a habit, which normally happens in white psychology. I had a bad habit, I'll now make a lesser habit. It's how do you completely rearrange the neurological pathway so that you get a different choice, the capacity to choose rather than to react. How do I gain self-mastery? Dr. Naim Akbar, Community of Self.
Right.
Now, when we're working from that, where self-actualization is the end goal, where I get to choose every moment of every day how I want to show up and respond to whatever is happening in front of me with reality and helping to shape that because of how I show up. When I want that level of freedom, that's when the system is set up to do anything and everything in order to take that away, that level of agency away. Okay? Paulo Freire talks about that in the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Pedagogy of Hope, Pedagogy of Freedom, that the whole purpose of the educator is to increase human agency. Now, I'd like to thank everybody who's stayed along for this journey. Brother said it is being curated. I'm taking him at face value. We are pretty deep in the weeds here. We haven't come up for air. I just want to acknowledge that.
Perfect opener. No, perfect opener. So, and you started alluding to this because we're still on question one, but I love it because you gave a comprehensive circle of everything that goes into this conversation. So
Yes.
if you were coming into this conversation in square one, you can go back and listen to this part of this recording and do your own independent research to get to where we're about to go now. And it's, okay, how does white supremacy culture erect and maintain those exact obstacles that we were talking about? When you talked about now that you're trying to gain this agency, how does white supremacy culture come up and try to buffer against that?
Right. So we're seeing it right now in real time with what the president is doing. Okay. This is the same game that Reagan used and Nixon used. Whenever you need to gain control of the populace, take money out of the system. Reagan did it. We're going to make smaller government. They do it for the exact same reason. Okay. Once money is taken out of the system, now poor people cannot put up effective protests. When the tent city idea was hot on college campuses over Gaza, and at Columbia University, the New York SWAT team was brought out in order to tell rich children, we will suppress you too. There was a huge amount of steam that came out of the resistance among European Americans because they found out that there was no way to do it in perfection. Again, 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture, where they would not get hurt. They were going to have to take a risk. And that risk is, as soon as you step outside the Commonwealth idea, outside of the Hamlet idea, outside of the village idea back in colonial America, the risk of you dying is so great from either animals, environment, exposure to the environment, whether the indigenous, who you cannot see, but they can see you, is so great that you don't take the risk. Same when it comes down to under the civil rights movement, where they would, if you were an ally, they would murder you right along with the black person. So it's instilled from childhood into our European American friends and family that if they deviate too far, there's a gradient area. But if they deviate too far to the point where now they look like they're aiding and abetting black people receiving services that they're not supposed to receive, then they can be exercised, they can be ostracized too, and
Right.
lose access to resources. Now they're in trouble. Okay, so that's a huge moral conundrum that a number of persons that have the conversation, European Americans, white body people who have a conversation with me who are vulnerable enough in order to do so, they literally say that it is the economic imperative of, I need access to the marketplace. That is the only real community that is given to white body people, the marketplace. They have to be able to access Amazon. That's why Mr. Elon Musk is crying and looking at, wait a minute, they're burning my product. They're making it to the point where people can't buy a Tesla, where it's being vandalized. You're taking business away from me. I can say anything and everything I need to be able to say anything and everything, but don't affect my access to the marketplace. That's where the class thing kicks in. Because if you will not respect my dollar, that's the Dr. King genius. Dr. King's genius was to teach black people to withhold the black dollar. And then when white people came to try and do business with the black community, don't take their dollar. Okay? We don't, he's in the Labor Union Hall of Fame for a reason. So Montgomery Ward, during the Montgomery bus boycott, they lost $2.2 million that season. That's equivalent to $23 million now. One store, Montgomery. When the trade deficit within their own dollars, what we're seeing, like we just saw yesterday with the 50-51, once white people lose access to the market, as Dr. King said, a rich man isn't rich if you don't respect his dollar. Now they have skin in the game. So the stuff that gets reinforced after you get the survival rate, the desire to survive, the fear of I'm going to be obliterated, and then the economics, the European Americans fall in line. Trump is crashing the economy to get the poor whites to fall back in line and not do like they did after George Floyd, want to bond with black, brown, and indigenous people, want to defend black, brown, and indigenous people. He's got to crash, take the dollars out of their hands to where now they are forced to participate in white supremacy. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. Because it's like, if my whole trick, at least from what I've seen as far as racism is concerned, it's the trick of, hey, listen, you take this psychic value that I'm going to give you over everybody else, even though you're still going to be impoverished or struggling middle class. But as long as you have this psychic benefit that at least I'm not these people on this rung, then I can, then I can control your behavior. Racism is not just about controlling people of color, quote unquote. It's about controlling other white tea people. You know what I mean? Saying, okay, no, listen, we're going to give you these perks, because I don't want you running away with this other person and trying to get free. I need you to work for me. So I'm going to give you some perks, a few benefits. I'm going to let you vote, right? I'm going to let you own a little bit of land, right? I'm going to make other people have to kind of kiss up to you in your presence. And then you need to be, complacent in what I give you while I capitalize off of your labor. And instead of people saying, well, wait a minute, you're actually exploiting me and I don't want, I need to join forces with black and brown people. It's whenever, you're union busted. We need to attack these people from taking away from what we have. So it's always been like a 99 against the 1% type of game in that regard. So no, I agree with you. Of the 15 characteristics of white supremacy, and we've kind of talked about, so I'm going to just go through them real quick. So for those of you that are there, it's either or thinking, worship of the written word, objectivity, individualism, quantity over quality, power hoarding, fear of open conflict, a sense of urgency, defensiveness, paternalism, progress is bigger and more, belief in one right way, the right to comfort, and perfectionism. Of those 15 characteristics, which one stands out to you when you think about this current moment and why? And I know you talked a little bit about this already, but what stands out as far as what's brought us to this moment?
Individualism and right to comfort. Two most insidious tag teams of that 15 list, because it is the trap that the colonial mind is imprisoned in. You can only stay in the parameters of the village. If you go outside the village, you run the risk of being scalped. They're scared of being alive, period. Okay? So you have to stay within the boundaries. So now that means that you have to develop your individualism. I'm only an individual. I have no power. Why? The group has power over me. What do you mean the group's got power over you? This is supposed to be about you being able to self-actualize. That's the whole point of individualism. That's the lie that is taught. So James Baldwin kicks in, where he does the analysis of the social programming in the 1960s during the civil rights movement of how European Americans have taught themselves a lie. That equality is happening, and a meritocracy is the United States of America. That, like you said, that it isn't I am taking these benefits and have life and death, the power of life and death over a black, brown, indigenous person of color, and I'm going to eat this Jim Crow so I don't feel bad about the fact that I can't make rent or that I'm always going to struggle making rent. And this rich person is going to have the power of life and death over me and food, clothing, and shelter. But at least I can kill a Negro. So when you're not able to numb the pain of the exploitation that you can see and experience and feel and talk about over social media, when your right to comfort is taken away and no amount of white weed, no amount of wine, no amount of soothing, no amount of yoga, no distraction and entertainment like we're having right now with Trump being so openly white supremacist, people are starting to crack black, white, and indigenous into what I agree with John Hope Bryant on this one, the black entrepreneur, that 80 to 90% of us are clinically depressed. If we follow Thelma Bryant, Dr. Thelma Bryant, not the DSM, Dr. Thelma Bryant, we're clinically depressed. But as we go get the next degree, because that's what black people do. That's what we're taught is rugged individualism here in the United States of America. So individualism and right to comfort are the two biggest of the 15 characteristics that I see failing people to cope with what's going on inside the United States of America during this second Trump administration.
Nah, that's powerful. I just want to come alongside that. I think those two definitely, and I also agree with the belief in there's only one way.
Yes.
And I say that because, like, when you think about the doctrine of discovery, in the way, the Catholic Church first put it out to the Portuguese and the Spanish, hey, you know what? There's Christians and there's everybody else. And everybody else, the heathen, you can take their land, you can unalive them, do whatever you want, because they're not really people. They're not really aligned. There's people that were fit, that were created for to inherit eternity, and there were people that were fit for destruction, right? And so you go into that, say, okay, we're going to Christianize the world, right? And then I feel like once you get into the colonial period, it's like, wait a minute, we've actually come in, we've conquered these lands, and actually a great portion of these people are now Christian, right? This is the one way I'm talking about. They're not Christian. So what do we do? Do we continue to evangelize these people, and do we now have to treat them as Christians, with rights and all of those things, or do we come up with something else? Because, if you're a Christian, you're supposed to have these rights, but now we're saying, okay, well, you can be Christian, we'll save your soul, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you get anything else, right? That's enough, right? In fact, we're doing you a favor, right? And so Christianity takes this long journey of where, a lot of people were European Americans who felt that they actually knew the truth and said, no, this is not what we believe. This is antithetical to what we believe, and here's why. And they have, preachers talking against it, but then and some of those participated in the Underground Railroad and became abolitionists. And you have a great mass of people that are just like, no, I'm gonna go to Sunday, I'm gonna go to Sunday school, church, and go right back to doing what I'm doing Monday through Saturday. And then you have liberation theology that starts to evolve out of that and saying, well, wait a minute, no, we're gonna use the word and we're gonna use it for what it's used for, which is liberation. But now with the Christian nationalist movement, it's resetting back to, no, this is a way for us to consolidate power. And what white people may find is that just like there was, you had to be Anglo-Saxon and Christian to be white back then, it's going to go back to, oh, no, if you're not Christian, you're not necessarily white. You have to believe these certain amount of things, these principles, and do them in this way. And if you don't do it this way, if you don't do Christianity this way, you're not necessarily a Christian anyway. And so because you're going to go to hell anyway, what does it matter a few years in servitude? What does it matter that we take your land? Or what does it matter that we unalive you, because what's that to endless torment, in this hell that we believe in. And
He's hard.
yeah.
Yes. Keep on. Because I mean, everything you just said, you're correct. The inner psychology, that's why I've been talking about the inner story, the inner narrative that European Americans are telling themselves and have been telling themselves since 1607 is what needs to be interrupted. That's one of the skill sets. It has to be
Yeah.
interrupted. Okay? Because they're constantly justifying this level of oppression. People think like, families like Plymouth Rock, like it was one small congregation of like 80 people on 4 ships that came. No, it was like 8,000 in Connecticut in 10 years. It was like difference between like 1620 and 1630 was huge. It was like it went from like 224 people to like 9,000 people. They came over 700 strong. It wasn't the myth that we tell of each other, tell each other what had happened is not what happened, and they left enough written word for us to know that that's not what happened. They came over with divisions, creating divisions for no reason. And
Mm.
Hutchinson, the Puritans, right? So the Puritans are fighting with the Anglicans, and the Anglicans is the church of the aristocracy of England against the Catholic Church, right? Because as soon as we get the Protestant Revolution in
Reformation, yeah.
1550, yeah, with Martin Luther, then you get, okay, how do you frame Christianity if it isn't based on the authority of divine right? That's why we have this authority. So then what does authority arise from? So the two big ideas that came out of that the Puritans were fighting over, does it come from grace, meaning it's bestowed by the providence to every human being, or is it through works? Meaning that you have to earn your way, Protestant, earn your way into heaven. Not you were just born again like Paul. Do you engage in like the disciples and engaging, creating the beloved community? Okay. They almost did Anne Hutchinson the way they did Joan of Arc. I mean, they kicked that woman out of Massachusetts when she was pregnant. The cruelty just goes on forever and a day. So yes, they're creating division when there was no need to create division. So you're literally already in the new world, and we're fighting over grace or works as Christian, whether you're the right Christian or not. And now we want to separate away from you. So no different than what you just got through saying, brother, where they're going to try and separate themselves under whiteness and say, well, you don't believe in the right ideology. I need you to convert to these ideas, the written word, the one right way, avoid open conflict. This is objective. Come on. In order to be safe in my presence, for me to perceive you as safe, because I've got the eternal fear of the water on one side and the forest on the other. And I have to stay within the parameters of the village. And if I leave away in any way, shape, or form, there's this historical ancestral fear that I cannot name that is always vibrating within me. And I'm trying to manage that fear. That's where the healing needs to occur.
That's powerful. So what would you say to the average American who might be asking, maybe for the first time, like, how do we get here and how do we get out of this?
They
Like
gotta
what?
look at their social programming. They gotta look at their social programming. Like if you are 30 years old and you're just now waking up, I got a lot of questions. How, homie? The last 9 years didn't do it? The
Right.
whole Gaza thing over TikTok didn't wake you up? How? Okay, how? They got to really look at how they have walked around here and maintained white racial innocence. How? I just don't look at the news. Why? Because it makes me feel bad about myself. What's wrong with feeling bad about yourself? What's wrong with you being empowered? The same power that you use in order to get a job is supposed to be the same power that you use in order to govern your life. Why do you not believe that you have the exact same power when it comes down to the school board or to the Senate or to the House of Representatives? Why do you throw away your power if you're a part of the oppressor class? If everyone is trying to get you to fall in line to conform to a particular order, then your resistance to falling in line is what they are trying to mitigate. You have all the power. I don't think that's something that I don't know how to drill that well enough into our European American friends and family, that if there's an oppressor class and their hands and feet are a part of the oppressor class against their will, the way that things change is by them choosing not to follow out evil orders and fulfill the outcomes that are built into the system. Don't follow the equation to its natural conclusion.
Right.
Interrupt. Why are you going to follow the evil orders?
It goes back to something you said earlier in this communication, which is the lack of empathy, the lack of real empathy, right? You only care about something when it affects you, and until it affects you tangibly, most often financially, but also, like, many times you lose someone that was very close to you for those same reasons. Now it's like, oh, this is wrong, this is evil. But until that happens, you accept the narrative that it's their fault. They did something. Either they're not God fearing, you know what I mean, or they're irresponsible, or they chose to be uneducated, or they chose to be impoverished. They're lazy. You know, all those negative stereotypes which are created for a reason. You buy into that, and it's like, okay, and you want to take something from me, who is a hard worker, who obeys the law, who does everything right. And you're just jealous because, you know, I do this and I have success and you don't. And because of that, plus the scarcity mindset that says there's not enough for everybody, there's not enough for me and you to both be successful, you feel like, okay, I got to protect this little corner of heaven here, and everybody else, you know, has to go fall to the wayside by choice. They do this by choice. But empathy is being able to see before it affects you. Wait a minute, what if I was that person? What if I was in that person's shoes? And it's what's very ironic is we know this. Like, there's been so many. What's the poem that's like, you know, first they came for the communists, and then they came, like, we know that, and we're actually positioned ourselves against, you know, 1940s Germany. Like, to them, they were the stormtroopers. They were the evil empire. And we position our entire culture as antithetical to that. We represent freedom, but yet we follow the same thought process when it comes to our problems, right?
Teach.
Yeah, and then not to know that they actually got their inspiration from us.
Right.
They came here to study.
So help me out real quick, because there are a number of reoccurring arguments to come up. What is the benefit among our European Americans of framing racism as hate?
Yeah.
Rather than what it is. What's the benefit?
I think the benefit of framing racism as hate is it becomes either it's this intangible thing that you can't touch, can't taste, it's not real, therefore it cannot be fought and cannot be ended, or it's something inherent to everybody. Everybody hates. Everybody has bias or prejudice. So you try to break it down to something that's either infantile and doesn't exist, right? Racism isn't real, or it's over with, it's something in the far past, or it's ever present, it's everywhere, and there's nothing we can do about it. So when we say racism is hate, it's like, because hate is an emotion we all have access to at one point or another. Racism is not hate. Racism is more of a business decision than it is hate. It's hey, how do we exploit and take the most resources out of this land, out of this group of people, and remain innocent? You know, how do we do that? How do we make sure that this is intergenerational? Because we know empires fall, we know systems fail. How do we build this into our generation? And the way we do that, the way we communicate is you're better than these people for these reasons. And so they deserve whatever they get. And as long as you believe that these people deserve what they get, the system's just going to keep churning it out. You know, and so, yeah, racism is hate. Racism is not ignorance. That's another one that I hear. Racism is something, you know, people just don't know enough. And, you know, if racism was ignorance, with as many books and libraries and now the internet, it would be over, because we're in the information age, right? This is the age of information. everybody can Google this and look it up. Many people won't, though, because they don't want the answers to those questions. They want to believe like it's unfathomable. But, as in all the different authors that you listed during this, pretty short broadcast, you could get a pretty good framework for what racism is. But they would rather just go to the dictionary and say, oh, I know what racism is. I know everything there is to know about racism. When, if you look at any other practice, you wouldn't look up, if you were trying to perform heart surgery, you wouldn't look up the definition of a heart in the dictionary and think you could perform heart surgery to heal someone. You'd have to study, or you have to ask someone who studied. You know what I mean? But so these are all go under, for me, the excuses that we tell ourselves, the lies that we tell ourselves, similar to the cheater who says that he can't, tell his wife the truth because she can't handle the truth. We come up with these lies to tell ourselves to justify what we do to other people. And that, to me, it's just evolved into this huge thing. It's one thing when you're dealing with a cheater who just has his narcissism and his lies to rely on. It's a different thing when you have an entire scientific community that's bought into the lie, and now they're coming up with, oh, it's the shape of the skull, or it's the size of the head that causes lack of intelligence, and that's why we're superior. So there's a whole era of science. When you look at the rooting of psychology, sociology, anthropology, that's rooted in racism and racist ideas, just to deal with the cognitive dissonance that, again, you believe in a loving God, someone so it's not only loving but all loving, so much that you would say God is love, and that gave the sacrifice of his only son so that everyone could have eternal life. And yet at the same time, you're taking those lives on a daily basis, right? And you're crushing those lives into powder for your own, not just survival, but pleasure. And it's okay, well, how do I justify that? Oh, well, I do that to my cattle. I do that to my, so that's how we have to equate it in order to try and function, not only function psychologically, but be able to have a moral high ground even.
So that being said, and the challenge that's in front of us, okay? Because I think part of the work that we have in front of us right now in this immediate moment, with the level of information that we can process, thanks to our phones, thanks to having access to each other on social media, thanks to the confirmation bias chambers that we know exist, there has to be pathway to create an inflection point, a tipping point away from the injustice towards justice. Because it's hard for me to believe that at this advanced date in United States history, with 341 million of us, that, like you said, hate is an effective excuse, ignorance is an effective excuse, apathy is an effective excuse, the pressure that is happening at the psychological level, thanks to the national conversation, is getting rid of that veneer. So then the impetus to come out of, the energy to come out of the social programming and to begin behaving in a different way. What do you think it's going to take, or what would be the combination of factors that would need to be in place for us to get over this basic, I don't know what I want to say, like pain quotient that we have when it comes down to connection? Meaning that the source in individualism, because of individualism and right to comfort, the source of our greatest pain in our society is actually the fact that we're interdependent, that we're connected to each other. And whenever we go for connection practices, if it isn't based on violence, like 9/11 or something else like that, we seem to put up tremendous resistance to connection practices that are built on love, peace, and happiness. What do you think it's going to take? What combination of factors do you think it's going to take for us to overcome that empathy gap, that connect to where the pain of connection is less than the pain we're facing?
There's a there's something else going on that I don't think we talk about in this conversation, that I feel like when it connects to people, I feel like they should get it. You know what I mean? So the same forces that existed, because the thing about capitalism, right, is we're trying to make the most money, the most surplus, off of people, and still allow them to live, to be able to make more from them. You know, whether that be future generations or whatnot. You want to, there's a threshold that you're going to push people up against,
Right.
that you're not going to go beyond, because otherwise your profit margin is going to go down. Because either people are going to stop buying from you, right? Or you're not going to have people there to produce for you for people to buy from. So there's only so much you can exploit people in third world countries, you know what I mean? Because otherwise they'll expire, right? And now where are you going to go, right? So the big piece about racism over the last 400, 500 years is we need a subclass of people that we can push beyond the normal threshold of what humans would call decent, right? Because, you know, people do have at least a veneer of decency where it's like, hey, this isn't right. Especially if you're a churchgoer, especially if you believe in a higher power, you believe that, you know, everybody was created equal, or all of those things, especially when you live in a country that has a constitution, all of those things. You have to say something contrived, albeit how far-fetched, to allow you to push people beyond that threshold. But still, you're not going to push them beyond the threshold where they expire, because now, you know, what are you going to do? It's like, you know, when you have people in the original Caribbean that completely expired because you overworked them. Well, now you have to import from a totally different place, right? But the unique situation we find ourselves in now is the same people that have the rhetoric of the 15th and 16th and 17th century. They want to go back to that time, are the same people that have the technology to not have to deal with humanity at all, right? Right. So I can actually create a factory that's automated to create my car. I have a drone that can make deliveries. I have an automated truck that can ship goods. I have I have a motorcycle that can drive on its own. So in that era where people are even when you're dealing with the military, as much as people are trained for regiment and one way thinking and obeying orders, you can come to a point where you push your army too hard, where they will rebel against you and say, wait a minute, I'm not doing this. This is against what you told me we were about, right? But if you're just programming your army, now you can tell your army whatever you want to. So you have a replacement to that. So if the 20th century was a question of the race, right, and what we do with Black people, what we do with colored people, the question of this century is, what do we do with humanity now that we can automate so much that we don't necessarily need this workforce or this underclass? What do we do with them? You know what I mean? Do we come up with universal basic income where everyone can, because it should be paradise when you think about it. One of the things that we needed to do to subsist on this planet was to conquer the agriculture, you know what I mean, to subdue the land and to be able to live in harsh climates, to survive winter was a huge goal. You know what I mean? I gotta make sure I don't freeze. I gotta make sure I have enough food. Well, now we're engineering seeds, and we have ways that we can create the food that we need. We don't necessarily need to even grow it, right? We can clone it. And we have all this automation, so we don't need everybody. We don't need to put 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds in a factory. We can have automation do that. But so do we create a society where we can all live, right? And enjoy that automation, enjoy that technology, or do we say, you know what, we don't need that many people? And when the people realize that we don't need that many people, they'll start to say, well, wait a minute, what actually, because if you feed that into an algorithm, if you feed that into an intelligence, the intelligence is smarter enough to know that there's not that big a difference between us. There's not. What we need to live, what we need to survive, we all eat food, we all drink water, we all need sunlight. So the algorithm knows What you don't. The algorithm knows that those stereotypes that you bought into are actually lies. So is the algorithm going to be able to differentiate between who you are as a white T person and who I am as a black person, or is the algorithm? It goes back to Ultron. You know,
Right.
you program something enough and say, well, wait a minute, we need this solution. How far down that line do we go? And I think that question is what's being worked out, where it's like, okay, how do we all become one country? Do we all of those things are questions that are being answered. And do you want to have input into that discussion as a person, or do you want to give it all to a few people to answer that question?
Facts. So while I get your accurate analysis of us going into a Harlan Ellison cyberpunk reality, I'm still left with the question of what's the tipping point? Because I'm in agreement with you that it is okay. Are they going to replace us with robots? We can shift this to where it's of benefit to us workers, to those of us who remain alive, or do we permit the excuses to run to their logical conclusions, and we either self-unalive or the environment change unalives us, or the governmental systems unalive us because there isn't a need for us. Where's still the tipping point to where there's a resistance, to where there's Zion, if we're going to use Neo, to where I don't know, everything is from our childhood, man. They don't know about Headroom. They don't know about Battlestar Galactica, where, yeah, there are cyborgs, there are robots. We are going to be dealing with technology. We're not going to stop the advancement of technology. But then I still want being human to be more than pleasure seeking.
Right.
Which is what it's set up to be. It's about to be set up to be.
And I know I took the conversation maybe in a direction because I see some of the comments, but honestly, look at who's in power right now. They're talking about going to Mars.
Right.
It would be far-fetched if it wasn't happening. It would sound like science fiction if it wasn't happening. They're talking about going to Mars more than they're talking about how do we live on planet Earth? How do we sustain on this planet? That's so the other side of white supremacy is the using our planet as disposable. Like just like there's infinite resources. Like not learning how to coexist with our planet. We have not done that. Are we going to be in Star Trek or Star Wars, or Enemy Mines, or you know what I mean?
That's the conversation. That's the inflection point that I'm trying to point towards. How do you avoid being in either one? I don't want to go into Harlan Ellison.
Right.
I don't want to do Isaac Asimov's Foundation. I don't want to do Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. I don't want to do something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. We don't need to go into that level of fiction. We can stay grounded in our humanity and, like you said, learn how to coexist within the parameters that this biosphere called Earth has already given us. That's what the parameters of humanity are. That's what human activity is. But at the present moment, people are going with 15 characteristics of progress, quantity over quality?
Right.
To where as long as we're moving forward, as long as I got a stronger tool, even though the tool isn't any better than the previous tool and it's just 10 times faster or 10 times greater in violence, then we're making progress. That's not true. Okay, and that's where Harlan Ellison, who comes up with cyberpunk, that means low humanity, high technology, dystopian future, that's the formula. He comes up with that. And when he starts exploring the psychological pain that his characters are dealing with by not being able to ever feel fulfilled. There's no meaning left in their life because everything is externalized to what you can do rather than what you can be.
Right. That's powerful.
I'm sorry that we keep going to Pluto and back with every
No,
exchange.
no. But it's powerful. It's a broad conversation. You know what I mean? It's a broad 15 characteristics for even broader conversation. I actually think we're doing a really good job. But
Okay, thank you.
just to get it real down to specific, I wanted to just learn a little bit more about you. If you could tell us a little bit about your anti-racist journey and how you came to your current understanding, and what makes you passionate about doing this work. I really anything you want to share, and you can say things you don't have to share. It's not whatever you feel like sharing. What I mean, some things are private. I understand.
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the license. So I went to the Beloved Music Festival. It's a healing arts festival that was here in, well, was, I'd say here, but was in Oregon. And for 10 years, they had this healing arts festival in the forest, and they would hire indigenous persons to come, or the authentic practitioners of a particular spiritual musical form, to come and perform. Okay. So they had indigenous performers, black performers, Hispanic performers, some white performers, but they're very avant-garde and in the spiritual realm. They also have classes. So there's meditations that are going on, there's healing arts, sound bowls, there's dance, ecstatic dance. There are workshops that are going on where you talk about what childhood trauma looks like and how to overcome it, and give you some techniques in order to do that. And at the 10-year mark, they looked around, so this would be Beloved 11, and say, how come for 10 years we've been having this and we've been putting out a very positive vibration? However, the only black people that are here are the ones that we paid to play music for us. So they hired 4 multi-ethnic films for Beloved 12 to inspire more black people to attend the festival. And they set up something called the BIPOC Sanctuary, Black Indigenous Persons of Color Sanctuary, a place where black people inside of this festival of 5,000, so you're surrounded by 4,800 white people in the forest, all on mushrooms, psychedelics, acid, weed, no drink, because it's healing arts. A place for us to go and confirm that we're having the experiences that we're having, that we're being treated the way that we think we're being treated, to where we don't have to deal with the white gaze. I was brought in as an elder to hold space in that sanctuary for 3 days. So I was on the mountain for 5 days, and it was a transformative experience, and transformative enough to, as soon as I got out of that space and returned to Ashland, Oregon, I wrote it down. That turned into a title called When and Where We Feel Safe. And it was learning how much psychic energy during that experience is expended by myself and other black, brown, indigenous persons dealing with whiteness. And it's like 20-30% of your psychic energy. So being in a healing space, listening to reggae from Hempress, Sativa, Digital Planets, poetry coming through, and having that level of confirmation that we are having a human experience. We're not having a racial experience. We're not having a classic experience. We're not having a sexist experience. We're having a human experience. That freed up so much psychic energy to where you could actually breathe, where you could actually find meaning in the moment, where you can actually experience awe, where you can just sit and look at the forest and feel that you are one with the biosphere. And that experience, that which goes beyond words of being, was so valuable that it was like, we need to create sanctuaries everywhere. We need to create spaces where you receive so much confirmation that there's nothing wrong with you, and that you are perceiving reality the way that it is happening to you, through you, for you, as you. That spark, that touching of the eternal flame is so valuable that you'll carry that with you when you leave this space, because you're not going to want to let go of it. I built an Ashland BIPOC sanctuary, and because of that being coming into existence, other people in the Rogue Valley, which is riddled with white supremacy, started affirming themselves. And that's all that's needed, is the flicker flame of this is possible.
Yeah.
I moved up to Eugene, and inside of Eugene, that flame was carried by Talisha Brown Crowell. This is all documented in the newspapers. She was at the Beloved Music Festival from the very beginning, helped craft it, nurtured it for the 10 years that it was there until Black people came and showed up. And then Talisha took off and started the Black Cultural Festival. And so for 3 years, we got suspended because of re-election. But for 4 years straight in Eugene, there was a gathering where business, children's games, animals, poetic expression, dance expression, culture occurred and gave ground and license for those who felt isolated in Oregon to learn, to learn that they weren't. That there was a community, a vibrant Black community in the midst of a white utopia that was completely clueless as to the condition that it is in. So I've spent the last 6 years really like on a bleeding edge of balancing dealing with the current events of injustice while nurturing the flame of I've seen better. I've experienced that there's a different way to do this, that we don't have to stay committed to the social programming and the outcomes that it keeps feeding us, to where we just have to tolerate and deal with greater and greater abuse. Like, there can be an interruption of this. We can mutate to a different state of being where we don't tolerate our hands and feet being used to produce an evil order.
That's powerful. Can you, in conjunction with that, because I know you're an author, you know what I mean, you do workshops. Can you share a little bit about how people can acquire your book, like what your books are about, and you know how they can support you, you know what I mean, the work that you do?
Okay, so like when it comes down to When and Where We Feel Safe, that is a book bundle where you get 2 of them, because every education is supposed to help you access your genius so that you can solve your problems. The main problem that many of our European American friends and family tell me about is, I know I am anti-racist. I don't know how to find another anti-racist person in my community without dying or risking death. So what I do is you get in contact with me, email me at royalstar907@gmail.com. You purchase a $35 book set, 2 copies of When and Where We Feel Safe. You read the first copy, and then at the end of each chapter, you do the somatic exercises as well as the answer the questions, introspective questions. Do that in a notebook. Then I want you to find someone in your sphere of influence that you can have a conversation about race, racism, whiteness with, and experience the least amount of charge. Not no charge. That's what most European Americans hear because of professionalism being one of the 15 characteristics of white supremacy culture. No, we're not saying no charge. I'm saying the least amount of charge. There should be some charge in the conversation. And then you bring your notebook with just your answers and share what you've been processing from having read the book. Once you share these answers, the person is going to have their reaction and be like, where are you getting them from? And that's when you give them your second copy of the book. If they read the book and do exactly what you did, do the exercises, write them out, and then they can go and find another person, not you, that they can have a conversation with the least amount of charge in this manner, then you got to get in contact with me again so you can give that third person a book. But in this manner, you can find 10, 12 persons that you can have a real authentic conversation about what it feels like to be white inside the United States of America right here and right now. Okay? I'm currently on tour doing a distribute the medicine tour at the grassroots level, purposely going into sundown towns. To be a sundown town, that means you are 88% or more white. I was in Idaho Falls, and that meant they're at 82% white. Yesterday, for the 50-51 protest, there was an older gentleman, and I would imagine that he's got to be in his 60s, because that meant that part of his life, his childhood, because he's looked old enough to be that. And part of it, that would mean part of his childhood was under segregation, and part of it was under integration. Okay? So those persons who have some segregation in their childhood are feeling over anxiety. And he showed up at the Idaho Falls 50-51 rally yesterday with a gun, a loaded gun. And he was interviewed by a number of persons and organizers, and they put it on social media. And instructions were given to not engage him, that he was looking to try and provoke somebody. That's why he was showing his gun, so that he could be violent. And that's what they're dealing with and processing. So I did a class in Idaho Falls called 7 Insights into Anti-Racism Work, because as soon as we do the shift and frame that racism, like you said earlier, isn't hate, it isn't ignorance, it isn't a moral failing, it's built into the systems of our society to create certain outcomes and an identity crisis of morality within citizens. The 7 Insights, once we shift from it being that moral failing and it being structural, then you're going to move and behave differently when you interact with the institutions of our society, to help the persons who are in those institutions to create the outcomes that are in alignment with life-affirming morality than with the racial caste system. Okay? So the next stop is in Hollister, Massachusetts, on April 18th. People can email me to attend said class, to get in contact with the organizer. You're looking to sell 50 copies, 50 bundles in 50 states. So you can assist in Massachusetts meeting its goal of 50 bundles, because we have 50 people who are looking for anti-racist persons within their community that will increase the possibility of the conversation happening. There being enough shield and shelter and popularity for the conversation to trend and people to be vulnerable enough in order to share what's going on the inside of them and their relationship to race, racism, whiteness while they live in a white body. And we got to get past blame, shame, and guilt, because those are all unproductive emotions when we're having this conversation about deconstructing and deprogramming from societal outcomes that produce a caste system. When we interact with each other, we want to have human connection. That's what we always profess and say that's the ideal that we want to have. Now, walking towards that is going to require healing journeys. And since because of being oppressed and oppressor, we can't do it in the same containers, I advocate for European Americans creating racial trauma centers where they can come and grieve their sense of loss from the programming, the deprogramming, the deconstruction. And then there can be BIPOC sanctuaries for Black people away from white people who are having that level of processing, and they be where we can deal with the internalized oppression, the culture of silence, where we allow each other to act out the oppressor's behaviors in our sphere, because that's the only definition of success that we've allowed ourselves to inculcate. So we have to create a different written and then lived out culture of what success is as a human being, because like you were alluding to, Sonia Sanchez was saying that in the 21st century, the problem, like you were saying earlier, isn't the color line, it's what does it mean to be human?
Right.
And we have to have a serious conversation outside of emancipate yourself from mental slavery, outside of making a slogan, outside of reproducing what Marcus Garvey said and did, where we create an identity that isn't based in us being oppressed. And that's a lot of cultural work that we haven't had an opportunity to do because of the active acts of oppression, the current events of injustice. So we got to have those two different spheres happening, and that's the movement that we want to craft at the grassroots level. So at the sundown towns, because if we can do it at a sundown town, that means the medicine is potent enough to work anywhere else in the United States of America.
That's powerful. I I do a lot of work around masculinity and chauvinism and trying to dismantle like the patriarchal ideas that we buy into because they support each other, right? You know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
you
big
know,
time.
so but I love the fact that you're empowering European Americans to have these conversations among themselves because, you know, a lot of times we catch the strays when we're involved, you know what I mean? Where it's like, you know, either you're tokenized or you're kind of put into a corner as if, you know, you have all the answers when maybe you don't, you know what I mean? Or your personal experiences are kind of, you know, pulled from you in ways that are, you know, just uncomfortable. And it's like, listen, this is something you have inside of you. You
Right,
need to heal from it, and you need
right,
to understand why. You know,
right,
you need to heal from it because it hurts you as well. You know what I mean?
right.
It's not healthy because as a person that's the more you invest in whiteness, the more you have to divest from your ethnicity, from what makes you what actually makes you a human being because you want to get these benefits, and those benefits have a price tag on them.
Teach hard. Like, and the cost of conforming. Well, okay, so we're constantly fishing around for what is the right metaphor, right?
Right.
So I think I was two years into my healing journey before it clicked to me that a different world of the Cosby Show was assimilation.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And I felt like Hulk Hogan had hit me upside the head with a chair, and I was the Macho Man, right? Like, like, get up from that. But at the same time, I had to put a different marker as to what does survival look like, what does thriving look like, what does being human, what does self-actualization look like if it isn't being installed inside of a white supremacy.
No,
So,
absolutely.
so having the psychological space to do that as a black person is what is driving me at the present moment because we don't have, like what we've done in our time and space here, a level of layered and nuanced conversation that is befitting the challenges that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
Because the Black Panthers saying that you can't fight racism with racism, only unity can do that. And the idea that unity is something that's outside of what racism can recognize. Like you're saying, when you're challenging masculinity and the way that it is expressed inside of the paradoxical power dynamics of the United States society, we try and use the objectivity of white supremacy culture to say that I can think outside of that, but if my behavior is no different than the social programming, then what is the point of the change in the content that's coming out of my mouth? I'm still practicing the sexism. I want to not only be able to change my behavior, I want to have the potency to create the different outcomes in my sphere of influence. Because what's the point of me being protective, but 19 out of 20 black men that are in my sphere of influence are not being protective.
Right.
They're not creating the level of safety that is life affirming. So being 5%, part of the blueprint is that if there is a park in your neighborhood, there should be a time where everybody in the neighborhood knows the gods are going to be there, and we're going to supervise from 3 p.m. until 7 p.m. So that anybody that wants to bring their child, this is the ideal time to bring your child. Why? Because if there's any kind of folk around, we're going to make sure that they chill. If there's anybody that's blood and crip, we're going to make sure that they chill. If there's anybody that is hungry, we're going to make sure that they get fed before the end of that 4-hour time period. This is about
Right.
to be a time of peace. That's literally supposed to be a part of the blueprint. Okay? That has fallen away. But if we are organizing our communities to the point where we are saying, no, this is a safety zone for this particular time, everybody else will then starts valuing that and wanting to fall in line. That's not masculinity that is based on violence and on what I can do as far as the imposition of force. You know, it's not the Mac. It's not Nino from New Jack City. It's not exploitive and extractive. It's going to be life affirming. And that we need to create spaces where we can have the conversation at that creative stem cell level where we're not just professing the possibility, but we have the potency to begin creating those spaces that
Right.
allow for people to grow. Because I'm a firm believer that love will inspire you to do crazy things, and growth is one of them.
Nah, absolutely. Carmenese says, to be honest, I think unity is the only way out of this. We just got to decolonize unity. And I think that's powerful. Carmenese, I see you. I saw your request. We had this one-on-one conversation, but I do want to bring you up once we finish our line of question, because I want to talk a little bit more about that. I want to hear that directly from you. But yeah, I think the issue with unity going into the whole, premise behind this conversation is our idea of unity has been infiltrated by the 15 characteristics of white supremacy. Perfectionism,
Right.
or either or thinking. All of these things kind of play into, all right, well, yeah, we want unity, but we want it only my way. You have to believe in my ideology. And a lot of times that can be very male centered, where it's like, we're not really thinking about the children. First of all, we're not thinking about women. We're not thinking about our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. We're not thinking about anyone but the normative that we inherited from our oppressor. And we're trying to replicate that with a black face on it. You know what I mean?
Preach hard.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes, brother. You can say that 3-4 times, and it's still, I don't know if they can pick up what it is that you just said. If we have to have the imagination. That's where the psychic, going into a space, the sanctuary, where it frees up the psychic space, where we're not dealing with white gaze,
Yeah.
but saying that we have the creativity to think of it anew. Is there another way? Not this way, but what is the range of possibility of ways
Right.
we could do this?
Absolutely. You have a phrase, and I've actually begun to adopt this phrase. But you say, "Our European family and friends," where others might just say "white people." And can you share your thoughts on what whiteness is and how white supremacy culture actually harms white people too, and why it's important to change that language, or where that kind of came from? I love to hear that.
Okay, so we are 8.3 billion strong human beings on this planet Earth. The racial caste system wants to artificially put us in categories based on phenotype. So when I'm saying European American, I'm moving away from usage of the racial term. I'm now going into, like we say, African American or Hispanic American or Japanese American. We're now going to use something that was crafted to try and get us out of the racial caste system. So when I start then say our friends and family, now this is the role that you have in my particular sphere of influence. So I'm trying to do my best in doing that and using that phrase to walk away, at least linguistically, from the racial caste system. As our European American friends and family react to that, that gives me a chance to define how I show up. And what I end up having to do is the psychological term of gray rock, allow the white person to experience their emotions around feeling race. I'm not going to reject you. I'm going to affirm the truth that we are human beings. And then I'm going to allow you to feel what needs to come up as you recognize I'm going to treat you differently than the social program. That's the practice behind using that phrase. Because I use so many phrases, I was almost like wondering which one you were going to bring up. So
No,
thank you.
no, I feel it's important. You know what I mean? Because there is a tendency to we started this conversation actually talking about the individual layer of the conversation and the collective layer of the conversation, and how when we get those two confused, it can really muddle things up, right? So
Right.
when we're talking about in general and collectively as groups, there are certain characteristics that apply just historically what those groups of people have done to other groups of people. But when you start to have a one-on-one conversation with someone as an individual, you know what I mean, and you try to have it on the collective level, sometimes you can inadvertently strip away the humanness that you're trying to get them to recognize. Or the defensiveness that they receive, you know, or that they get from the connection, because there is a connection between the two, right? Because these privileges have been endowed upon you, whether you want them or not. But
Right.
you think I'm attacking you or saying something about your character when I'm not. I'm saying something about your potential to do harm, and probably have done harm, whether you intend to or not. I'm talking about your impact. I'm not talking about your intention. I'm talking about your behavior. I'm not talking about the contents of your soul, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
yeah. So,
Right.
I just love the way you make that distinction, you know, and so you,
So one, okay, so to remain on that track, certain people struggle over the last 150 years of black people being able to read and write
yeah,
to articulate how shared vulnerabilities existing between black and white people in the racial dynamic, like what you were just pointing toward, where we struggle to find the words to talk about the shared vulnerability. It's a shared vulnerability that we have with European Americans, and it's at the identity level, right? So if I acknowledge what is going on and the lies that I have to maintain in order to function with myself or with the group dynamic, when we talk about the impact of the group dynamic and me not wanting that group dynamic to impact me, whether I'm black or white. And that's the part where I don't think we have the proper language for it, right? Because if you're black and you don't want violence, if you're white, you don't want violence. But the kind of violence that we're talking about is different. One is like PR for white people. White people don't want the public relations violence of
right,
you're a white person. Black people literally don't want violence. But it's a shared vulnerability on both ends that we have a hard time having a conversation about, because we're talking about the exact same human element, but the way it plays out in our society, whether at the individual level or collective level, is so vastly different because of the caste system that we're talking past each other, even as we're using the same language,
right,
because of the lies that are necessary for the caste systems to give us identity. And it's exhausting. That's where the 20% of psychic energy is being wasted.
right. Uh, um, so, when we think about behaviors like power hoarding, defensiveness, and either or thinking, how does white supremacy culture seep into the minds of people the world does not identify as white? And then in conjunction with that, how are non-whites maneuvered against each other to help keep white supremacy culture in place?
Politics is the flow of resources through a human system, period. Politics is not the he said, she said of the newspapers. But
Mm.
politics is the flow of resources through a human system. Mr. Trump is actively taking resources out of human systems, which is then going to cause those who are non white to suffer in ways that those who are white are not supposed to suffer. So those who have more means, access to power to implement a public policy or not implement public policy, and have access to currency or not have access to currency, are able to regulate the behaviors of white people so that they stay in alignment with white supremacy culture. It becomes a resource stream, not currency. You can have literally W.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction. He takes him 730 pages to talk about what you had made reference to, the cost benefit that comes from racism, where you get the power of life and death over another human being or a series of human beings, meaning that the poor white person could call 911 and get a black person killed. Amy
Right.
Cooper instead of Christian Cooper at the New York Central Park with the bird when he was bird watching, and she
Right.
was able to get on the phone and potentially. That's the power. Okay, that's the power. So, when I can have the levers of poverty and physical violence keeping you in line, you will create a justification, a argument that you think you can put on social media or with your sphere of influence, your friends, co-workers, that justifies you compromising your morals in order to have access to resources so that you can eat. That's been true since 1880, after the Civil War, the Second Civil War that happened in the United States territory, where you have, what, 20 million Europeans that come in from 1880 to 1920. There has to be a way for them to become white, because there are certain parts of colonial and before the Civil War, if you were Irish, if you were Scottish, if you were Italian, you were too swarthy to fit into the racial caste system. We couldn't tell if you were black or white within the clear delineation between Thomas Jefferson and you and I. So they had to come up with all kind of gradients in the middle, and they said, hey, well, after a while, there's so many black people that we lost 600,000 white-bodied people that were white. We're going to have to make you guys white adjacent. And then after being white adjacent, then we're going to give you, after you prove your worth by, like the Irish, becoming police catchers, slave catchers, police officers, and you go to lynchings, enough lynchings over between 1880 and 1920, then we'll make you honorary white. And then after the Great Depression, we're going to make you full white.
Right.
Excuse me, pardon. So, all based on violence towards you and access to resources. So between those two mechanisms, white people are herded and installed into positions within the white supremacy to create those outcomes, then numb themselves through drug usage or distractions in order to deal with the moral pain that comes with creating those outcomes. You're the nurse who sits there and watches a doctor give an indigenous person a hysterectomy, and you have to tell yourself, as the nurse, you have no power. You got to lie to yourself,
Right.
but you're going to keep going to that job, and he's going to keep sterilizing indigenous women, and you're going to keep your mouth shut, and you're just going to drink your sherry at night so you can keep your job. And that's how they recreate the outcomes and justify it to themselves. You are installed into a position. You don't choose it. They're not conscious of it. There's no contract. They're not laid out where they give them the pros and cons and tell them to make a choice. It's like literally life or death. Politics is the flow of resources through a human system. Period. That's how, brother.
Understood. So another thing that on your platform, you've been counting the days since the current administration has taken office, and also how many days until the end of this presidential term. Why is it important to do this?
to try and frame it in a way that the current American mind can understand it, because we're so data driven as a society. So we're 76 days into the second Trump administration. 76. I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to use Cobra Commander memes to try and describe what it feels like in this second administration. Cobra! You know? This is, we think in terms of marketing. We think in terms of trends. We think in terms of advertising. So there have to be slogans to even be able to spark a conversation on social media that'll get people's attention. That's why I'm doing it. Does that make sense?
No, no, that makes sense. I like it because it also in an administration that wants to go beyond those days and wants to overreach and wants to create a much longer stretch of power and control, putting into those frames like, no, this ends on this date. And this is how many days this has started. Like this, it keeps you in touch with reality because the goal is to distort reality and distort time, distort place, distort meaning, distort what words are understood to be. And so just saying, hey, it's been 76 days since this happened, puts you in the context like, wow, wait a minute, it's only been a couple months. So it lets you know this is how far we have to go. But it also lets you know, like, listen, this is the goal that we're working towards, that this actually ends, at that time.
Yes. Whatever we can use in order to ground people into their inner capacity to act. I'm
Yeah.
an activist. I want you to act. I don't want you to continue wallowing in blame, shame, guilt. Those are unproductive emotions. I said that earlier. I'm going to repeat it. Those are completely unproductive. You have the same power and potency to act before Mr. Trump became president, before November 5th, 2024, that you do now. Nothing has changed when it comes down to your access to being human.
Right.
Now we may be shook with the popular opinion that you don't have any power. That's a lie. Otherwise, Mr. Trump would not be doing what he's doing and need a position called the presidency.
Right.
As a correctional officer says, you can't run the prison without the consent of the prisoners.
Absolutely. Lastly, and this is I'm gonna let a few people up just to share some thoughts as well, but I appreciate your time and I want to be respectful of your time. And you've shared with us for 2 hours straight now, and it's been gems, straight gems. I think for those of you that go to YouTube, I'm Fatal Pros at YouTube. I'm also, you can search Fatal Pros on Spotify where you'll be able to listen to this. Give me about a week to do the edits and this will be up. But I think this is one of those recordings that you're going to want to listen to again and again because Royal Star Law has really brought a lot of facts and a lot of branches, a lot of things that can lead you to different areas of study. And I know that's, on purpose. But, for those people that are listening, and wondering what they can do to survive, cope, change, heal, recover, and resist, what are your advice to those people?
Okay, so here's what I think overall that we're going to need to move towards. And then it's work backwards, okay, as far as what the actual solution in our United States society is. It goes, number one, the adoption of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is 30 parts. That gives us something objective that is not left, right, conservative, Democrat, and doesn't move. It's also been in existence since 1945. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. After that, I think that we need to begin honoring all treaties with indigenous systems, indigenous people, whether alive or dead, which means a third of the continental United States land management goes to indigenous people. A third. Okay? So that's highways, that's federal lands, all that. Honor the historical treaties. Number three, orientate the U.S. economy to where we take care of our children. End child hunger. Because if we make it so that each child has access to 7 to 8 different ways to get a meal, that's not coming directly from their parents, that's in our society, then we will completely revolutionize out of capitalism. We may have to use capitalism for a little bit, but we're going to have to solve that problem, do something that's closer to scientific socialism. Number 4, give reparations to black people. And by reparations, I'm not talking fiat currency. And then lastly, we need to have an entirely new constitution that is not built on Enlightenment ideals. So then, with that being the end product, we're going to need to backwards plan to what skill sets are needed in order to create those people who are free enough in order to implement that kind of solution set. Very first thing I suggest that people do is learn how to garden. Why? This is the most human thing that is human. What have our ancestors spent the great majority of their time on the planet doing? Gardening. Not hunting. Gardening. Okay? I don't know how many solutions are implemented by grandparents teaching grandchildren how to garden. How the community shifts and changes when there's an abundance of food and people get taught how to cook, how to care, how to preserve, how to share, how to do stone soup. I don't know what kind of exchanges start happening story to story rather than book to book. I don't know what changes occur within the community when we start acting like a community and not like individuals living inside of houses. So I can say those two things on the extremes, but when it comes down to the who, what, when, where, and how to actually implement that, I think that it's going to be up to the next generation that's going to actually provide that. And right now I'm going to spend the rest of this life trying to amend the soil so that that generation actually has a medium in order to plant their ideas in.
That's powerful. I'm gonna, with your permission, I'm gonna bring up just a few people.
Go right ahead, brother.
Asa, I know you've been listening, and thank you so much for holding space for us. Did you have any comments or things that you wanted to share based on what you heard?
Yeah, and thank you, hon, because my voice is usually not that big. But I've been absolutely loving the whole conversation. So thank you both for sharing the way that you are. And one of the things that I've been looking at, just kind of just listening in on everything, has been one of the things that I kind of push, because I am in the mental health field, and I push collectivism, but radical self-love.
Oh,
And because I realize with the demographic that I work with, that's not, they're dealing with so many different things, right? They're dealing with a lack of care, sometimes just familially. They're dealing with some mental health issues. They're dealing with a lot of societal issues, and because they don't have a lot of support, they just don't have support. So they lack a lot of basic things. So I've actually started encouraging, anytime I have any kind of session with them, we work on affirming ourselves. And no matter where they are in their journey, right, on this plane, it's like I still push them, honestly, to see their worth, their inherent natural self-worth, just because they're on this plane. And I think so many people, they don't have that, right? And until you can really value yourself, you aren't able to value the next person. You're not able to grow, in the way that I think, honestly, we're meant to grow as humans on this plane, right? Or as spirits having a human experience on this plane.
Right.
And so with that, because one of the things I put in the chat was bringing the griot back, because I look, and Fatal Pearls will tell you, I always have like all of these comments. So this live was like everything. Cause I'm sitting there like, yeah, that right there, that right there. But what I kind of looked at, and I'm trying to summarize it real quick. Everything that you said resonated, right? Because when I looked at everything that this current administration is doing, even though I was a child when the other actor guy was in office,
Right, Reagan.
I was always a child that had a book in her hands. So I saw what his policies did to certain communities, right? And it was intentional. It was intentional when he was governor of California. It was very intentional when he got into the office that, the Trump holds now or whatever. But there was always there's always that plan, and people miss the fact that they feel like it's just along a color line. It's really not. It's have nots, right? But also in trying to encourage the community that I serve, I try to help them get out of those oppressive states of mind, or those oppressed states of mind, and those downtrodden states of mind, because that in and of itself is huge. I've said a few times that and I've said this in some of my classes, almost from birth, as a Black person or a person of a certain hue, we're born knowing things are different for us. You gotta be better, gotta be smarter. If you're not fortunate, you're in your household wondering why I'm not lighter, why I'm not darker. So we have all of these things shoved on top of us from a very young age. So absolutely there are mental health issues there, and there are spiritual issues there. And there's so much healing work that has to be done. So that's, like I said, that's how come I do. I try to encourage with the groupings that I work with. Hey, let's figure out how to build a garden, even if it's a small plot of land, because working in the soil is healthy and helpful.
Yes.
Like you were saying. I grew up with a grandmother who taught us we had literal greens, cabbage, the whole nine. I'll be honest, as a child, I didn't like it. Because I didn't grow up in the South. I grew up in the city, and here we have all this stuff growing and working. But there were lessons there that were intangible. You know what I mean? I still remember being in the kitchen with her, learning and getting those lessons. And my grandmother did not have one recipe written down.
Oh, teach hard. Oh,
but
my God.
I can go in my kitchen and pretty much make everything she made, with the exception of blackberry dumplings, because I don't know. I didn't catch that, right? But those lessons that are soul deep, I think, are what a lot of people miss, and I think a lot of our youth miss them. But okay, and that's me, my soapbox. I'm gonna step off.
No. You are absolutely correct. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, because crafting a healthy Black mind in the midst of Babylon has got to be one of the greatest challenges that is facing an educator, psychologist, minister, or physician in 2025. So thank you.
Reflection is the mother of the revolution. Revolution is just a sun for the next generation. Generations are just light for the memory for countless babies born each morning. So where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line in time to even picture a timeline where by definition a line has no beginning or ending? No, each morning is just another reason to lose count of a time that never existed. Because while we pretend we walk reality in straight lines, the planet itself spins in cycles, leaving revolution obvious. Dancing circles around a rectangular concept of progress we like to call God, praying salvation light, creating sacred shapes to keep the colors in the corner and the blacks on the fringes and the money on the center. Building a pyramid of interest that keeps its inventors walking through life like it's a shadow of death, when it's really just a shadow of death cast by skyscrapers that keep success held high like a candle in the sky, reflecting the sunshine, providing just enough false light to keep the peasants and hoodlums scrambling to the breadcrumbs left to keep the righteous backsliding to the semi-line to hell. And I'm wondering why revolution is a four-letter word, yet the way people profanely spell it, like it's filler, like it's offensive, like it's anything else than just another word rusting on a shelf of good intentions, like love, love life, life free, free. This is what they taught me and told me was tangible. A few years after I learned that I was black and what black really means, before I took a pencil in my hand for the first time and tried to sketch America, or at least what I thought it could be. I took my own blank sheet of this country, my own little state of being, my own little city of influence, and I thought that if I could just sketch blackness correctly, if I could just make the color walk in sharp lines and complex shades, if I could just express how beautifully black and white could coexist on paper, all the could haves and would haves and should haves would start to amount to shit, and intentions would accumulate into what I did and what I have and what has happened. But what I found was that the world wasn't framed in black and white, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't describe like love, life, life free, with those means, only two-dimensional streams of pain and history to keep repeating themselves in current events. Because composing a revolution is like trying to draw an ocean that can show which way the water flows. Yeah, the tide is going out, but the waves are still coming in and around and at you, and they're not staying in the shorelines. They're crashing right on top of your neighborhood, and the riptide is dragging children out of their schools, and fathers out of their families, and mothers out of their minds. And you can see them trying to tread water, straining just to stream, with their lungs half filled, drowning from the very same substance every other person in America is drinking and enjoying at this very same moment right now. Freedom. Or at least, if they thought it would be. And so I traded my pencil in for a paintbrush and left revolution for things like truth and meaning and understanding and cooperation, things that could make freedom more safe. And I thought that if I could just color my canvas in such a way that it explained diversity vivid and depicted democracy real, even pictured peace profitable, that the people, all the people they would look, all the people they would listen, and the people they would live, and stop killing each other over colors and shapes and sizes and dimensions, like love life free, like me, capturing every color that I see in the aerosol can trapped behind my teeth, trying to spray paint dreams faster than wind can take them from me, watching as they vaporize before my very eyes, before they barely leave my lips, before the wall can ever wear my thoughts or receive my gifts, because America does not exist. It isn't real. This new world has always been here and yet never tangible. Told like those fairy tales my teacher told me a few years before I learned I was black. What black really means. Like love life free. Like this country with no lines, in the hand of a president that doesn't know how to draw, scribbling a sketchbook so soaked in blood, the pages disintegrating every time pen meets paper. So they bleached it on the whites that was originally woven white anyway, and let borders die until the colors went off the corners, put in concentration camps. And the blacks went off the fringes, placed in penitentiaries. And the money, oh no, let's not forget about the money. It's put back in the center, and everything is right wing, no matter left or the left extreme, or whatever. As long as it flies and blends into a sky so covered in clouds, the population can't see its ground. They just walk on faith and pray to a God that lives in a box and can't define his own face or her own sex or its own shape. Like love life free like America, bombing poverty with food, free to choose who eats and who dies, free to define what freedom is, and staple to the eyelids of little kids who never learned that sleeping in intelligence is far worse than walking in ignorance. So they walk freely off of cliffs, sleep freely off of cliffs, knowing full well where it is. They just don't care. They just don't care because they see what I see.
Much to say between the moments of our games and repartee. There's never much to read between the lines of what we need and what we'll take. There's never much to talk about or say aloud, but say it anyway.
They woke up each morning to look in the mirror and see a dream lying behind its teeth, smiling like it wants to say something happy or funny or inspiring, but instead it just stares and grins and stays silent because it's not really there. It's just a lie passed down from parent to parent, like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, or something to keep the little kids moving along through the grades, anxiously waiting for the present like it'd be anything more than a toy. That's why I play games with my time and look surprised when it's so broken. When the minutes are bleeding out of its beady eyes, and the months are sticking together like fur, coated with what used to taste like candy, but now just resembles the cavity that torments my waning smile. And I'm old, and I'm gray inside, with black and white so smeared on my soul and psyche, it became my religion, breaking the body of my sanity until truth and lie became the last of the relatives of my family. So I traded in my paintbrush for a son, and I thought to myself, if I could just teach this one baby that God has blessed me with to like love, to search for it as if it were a lost brother or sister, to want as if it were the first teddy bear I placed in his crib, if I could just raise this one child to love life, to admire and cherish it, as if it were the finest art, to treat it as like it was priceless, and collect every piece of it, to learn the forgotten craft of creating life. Life would be free. My life. All life would be free through my son, and would be free through my reflection. And that's when I realized